He did.
And he has definitely regressed this year, and as has Coach Matt Nagy in his decision making. So it's kind of spelled trouble for Chicago. And then we also, I think, surprisingly, if you told me that the Bears defense would be struggling as they did, not as much against the Chargers, but the previous 2 weeks, they were struggling again against the Raiders, and so that would have surprised me because that Bears defense is so good, and they're missing Akeem Hicks, but I thought their backup players played really well against the Vikings, and since that Viking game, it's amazing how the Bears have gone one direction bad with 3 losses during that period, while the Vikings have won 4 straight. So kind of crazy the way it turns out. But, yeah, the Bears are having significant issues. The kicker, he misses the 41-yard kick. Pinheiro misses the 41-yard game winner. And then after the game, he says, well, I wanted to be on the other hash mark. And so, and also the fact that meanwhile, the Chicago media is beating up Nagy because he kneeled down a couple times rather than trying to advance the ball and get Pinheiro closer because he'd already missed a 33-yarder in the game. And meanwhile, Trubisky played a little bit better than he had the previous couple of weeks when he got booed out of Soldier Field, but he's not playing fantastic football either. So there's definitely issues in Chicago, including the defense, and much to the joy of the Vikings, certainly, that the Bears are sitting at 3-4, and they have a tough matchup on Sunday going to Philadelphia, who's coming off a big victory, and the Eagles are playing better these days and getting some guys back healthy, and they're back to 500 on the season. So interesting week, as you said, in the NFC North with all 4 teams on the road. I don't remember ever having all 4 teams out in the division on the road on the same week, but they're all heading out. And Bears at the Eagles, Packers at the Chargers, which could be an interesting game too. You got to go to the West Coast and face Phillip Rivers, and the Chargers have a little bit of newfound confidence. And certainly, you got to say the game's more meaningful for the Chargers sitting at 3-5 than it is for the Packers at 7-1, even though the Vikings are right on their heels.
What struck me about watching the Bears was that all their misdirection, cutesy pie play calling, get Tariq Cohen in space kind of stuff didn't work at all. I think the NFL has figured out what Nagy wants to do. When they had offensive success, it was almost more on conventional running plays where they got David Montgomery going and Trubisky dropping back and actually looking like a real quarterback and picking a receiver and using a very strong arm to get the ball there. I don't know if you had the same takeaway.
Yeah, I think you're right, and perhaps that is the case, and certainly in terms of the misdirection and the jet sweeps and all those things that Nagy has liked to use, and perhaps teams are picking up on that a little bit, and so we'll see how that shakes out, and perhaps that has to be a concern of the Vikings too. Our team's going to pick up on the play action. Well, when you got a back like Dalvin Cook, maybe not, because they still have to be focused on him, and that has certainly made a huge difference in this Viking offense that they're calling play action about 35% of the time, more than any team in the NFL, and they've used it so effectively the last few weeks. But yeah, the Bears right now, they're a mess, but we know in the NFL, all it takes is 1 week and one big win and things turn around, and all of a sudden it's a different story. So we'll see how that shakes out. And I think, meanwhile, I'm really excited about this game in Kansas City. I think it's a great matchup. Whether Mahomes plays or not, I think it's going to be a big challenge for the Vikings, but it's a game that I think is winnable, and perhaps more so than we thought maybe a month ago.
So let's go into our pick, and then we'll talk briefly about J.J. Watt and his contract situation, how it affects the Texans. What is your pick for this week?
Well, if you tell me for sure that Mahomes is out, then I'm going Vikings on this. And if he plays, then I think it's a really kind of a crapshoot. And if Mahomes was 100% healthy, I would probably take Kansas City in this game. But with him out of the game, I'm going to go Vikings. I'm going to still say it's a high-scoring game because I do think that there is the opportunity for both teams to make plays. I'm very nervous about Xavier Rhodes and how he's been playing this year, and I don't expect to see Mike Zimmer having him locked down on Tyreek Hill. I think
bad matchup.
No, they're going to be moving. They're going to let Rhodes and Trey Waynes play their sides and see what happens. But I think Andy Reid's going to go after Rhodes, just like the Redskins did in the first half last week with Case Keenum. And so Xavier Rhodes has got to step up his game, or something's got to give there, and try to figure out ways to protect him with double coverage on his side of the field. And so I think that's got to be a big concern for the Vikings going into this game defensively. But so I see the Chiefs scoring some points. I think Matt Moore will make some plays. I think the Vikings can get some turnovers off him too, with the pass rush, especially if Fisher and Wiley are out of this game. And I think another key element is what's the situation on defense for Chris Jones, the defensive tackle, excellent player for the Chiefs, and Frank Clark, the defensive end, their big free agent signee from Seattle, who gave the Vikings fits last year on that Monday night game, by the way, for the Seahawks. And if those two guys plays, I think that changes the dynamics of the game too. But I'm going to go Vikings in this game, and I'm going to call it 31-27, high scoring, fairly close game.
I'm going, if Mahomes plays, Vikings 30-27, which is funny we're that close. And if Moore plays, I'm saying 30-20. But we'll see. We're both kind of in the same ballpark there. All right, tell me what you wrote about J.J. Watt for your sporting news column.
Yeah, I think it's really kind of unfortunate. J.J. Watt, great ambassador for the league, great player, class act on and off the field, and he's had his third season-ending injury in 4 years with the torn pec muscle that he sustained against the Raiders last week, and it's just kind of a crushing blow to the Texans defensively, who already had traded away Jadeveon Clowney, and they're 20th ranked in the league on defense. And Watt was actually having a pretty good year. His numbers weren't great. He had 4 sacks, but his pressures, according to the famed Pro Football Focus that everybody likes to quote all the time, he's got 52 either sacks, quarterback hits, or pressures, which leads all 4-3 defensive ends in the league. That stat was courtesy of also my friend Peter King. And so I think that from JJ's standpoint, and I wrote about this a couple of years ago when he had his last big injury, the broken leg, and he was going to make $11 million that next year. And I said I wouldn't be surprised if the Texans go to him, even though he still had about $8 million of dead money at that point, but that the Texans would go to him and try to get a reduction in pay and build it back with incentives. Well, they didn't do that, and JJ rewarded them with a fantastic season last year. He was runner-up for comeback player of the year, had 16 sacks, 7 forced fumbles, terrific year. And then here again, he gets hurt once more. I think the difference now is there's no dead money on his contract anymore. He also is in a situation where he is 31 years old going into next season compared to 29 years old. And so what I wrote basically is that I would try to, if I was the GM in Houston, and they don't even have a GM right now, but if I was the GM there, I would definitely approach JJ and his agent, Tom Condon, and say, we need a reduction here because we can't pay you $15.5 million next year and worry about you not being able to play the whole season. So I think there's a way for both sides to kind of compromise on this and have him come in at $8 to $10 million or something, build it back up with incentives. If he on roster bonuses, if he plays more than 8 games, up to 16 games, you give him back to his salary as long as he has double-digit sacks. And that's how I would structure a deal in this case, because I still think I'm not going to count him out, because anybody who did last year, and I was one of those people who thought he'd never get back to what he was, and he did. I'm not going to count J.J. Watt out ever, but I think it's going to be a lot more difficult this time for him to come back as the dynamic player that he was. And so I would approach him, try to get that kind of reduction, and even give him some upside, Jim, where if he went out and had another 16 sack season and Pro Bowl and in the running for Defensive Player of the Year, then maybe you give him another $5 to $7 million and bring him up to where Khalil Mack is, because he'd be worth it.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Let's get a final thought from Jeff. Reminder to follow us on Twitter at Talk North Pod. Thank you to Brandon Morton, our longtime producer. And remember, in addition to White Bear Lake Superstore and B52 Burgers and Brew, we also have a deal with Bite Squad. Promo code is Talk North, but go to bitesquad.com. They might have a better deal for you in your area. But using the promo code Talk North, we'll get your first delivery fee waived. And also remember, they have a members deal that will get you free delivery any place within a 4-mile radius for $5.99 a month. Good deal, great food, great service. Final thought, Jeff.
Well, I'm going to talk. My final thought is about Mike Zimmer. And we've talked before how brutally honest he can be. And we were talking about this with the players on the Monday Night Purple show on WCCO the other night, and how players love that not only is he honest with them, but he's honest with himself. And that he admitted the 4th and 1 call, decision to go for it against Washington from the Vikings' own 35, and they're up 7 at that point in the second half, and Haskins is in the game, and he's not playing well. And Zimmer called it the dumbest decision I've made since I've been here. And he also repeated that, I think, to the team. And so I think that's the kind of coach that players like to play for, and that people in the organization respect, because he'll admit a mistake too, that he made a mistake in that situation, which I immediately thought, what are you doing? Why would you go for it here when you got the game? It was a 7-point game at that point. Why even give them an opportunity to have life? And he admitted that he would not do that again. So I love that he owned up to that mistake.
Absolutely. I think coaches in general should go for it more on 4th down than they do, but it's cool that he actually admits it, and I'm sure the players do like hearing that. That's it for this week. Thank you to Jeff Diamond. Thank you to Brandon Morton. Thank you to our sponsors, and thank you to all of our listeners across the TalkNorth.com podcast network. We'll be back next week to talk about the Chiefs game and a very interesting matchup with the Dallas Cowboys.